Okay, we're going to get started, I think. We're,
Okay.
we're welcome. Thank you all for coming to this evening, and we're welcoming Karen Antonowicz this,
Good job.
this evening to talk to us about shoes from the 19th century and the 20th century. And I am really looking forward to it, just like all the other people here. I really love shoes. And so why don't you tell us a little about yourself and then we'll get started.
Okay, thanks, Nancy.
Thank
Uh,
you.
yes, she got the pronunciation of my last name. I'm very proud of her. That's not an easy one. Um, but I was telling Nancy, I'm up here in Vermont. We moved to Quechee a couple of years ago, but I'm from Rhode Island originally. And just a little bit about how I got to do these presentations. I was a dietitian for my first career for 20 years, and I was never really loving it. And had this real interest in vintage clothing for years. I started collecting and reading about it all the time. So long story short, I found out that the University of Rhode Island had a program, a master's program in their textiles and merchandising department, but they have a concentration in historic costume and textiles. So that was it. That was it. I knew it was the right thing. Went to grad school, taught for 13 years at the college level, and I liked that a lot. I loved it. But then I started doing these in 2012. 2012, I did my first, it was live, of course, in person at the time, at Attleboro Library in Massachusetts. They had a 100-year anniversary of the sinking of the Titanic. So I did a whole thing, just like I'm going to do for you tonight. I did slideshow with video clips, and then I had clothing and accessories from the period. And so I knew that was it. I said, this is my audience. This is what I need to do. So in the meantime, my husband and I opened an antique store in Providence while I was still teaching. And then 5 years later, he said, I'm done. We're all done. We have to move. So we moved up to Vermont and opened Nostalgia Cafe in December, like two crazy people in the middle of COVID in the winter in Quechee. Long story short, it's still struggling to get going, but the busy season's coming. So that's my background. So I'm going to go ahead and get right into this because there's a lot of things to cover about shoes. But what I'll do at the end, as I said to Nancy, I will, after the presentation and the slideshow, I will show you as best I can the shoes I have from my collection, and then we'll open it up to questions and comments. Okay, so I'm going to share the screen now and pull this up and make it big for you. See where it is. Here it is. Share, enlarge it, and make it the slideshow. Okay. All right, here we go.
Perfect.
Okay, yes. Okay, I am going to start way back, just for a few slides, just to give you an idea of how the whole thing started with footwear. So just a little bit, this is the oldest sandal ever discovered in Fort Rock, Oregon, about 98 years old, approximately, this shoe. So look at the condition it's in. I mean, that's amazing. But these are the oldest sandals. They don't look like sandals because they're closed toe, but that's what they called them at the time. And these are the oldest shoes discovered, 5,500 years old in Armenia. So again, not bad shape considering how old they are. And it just depends on where they've been all of this time. Sometimes there's certain conditions, I think more alkaline conditions, that keep things preserved for a much longer time, as you can see. It's amazing. I'm going to push forward to the Middle Ages. So we're looking at the medieval period. And interestingly, just like any other period, fashion goes to extremes before it starts going back the other way. Just think about the 1960s miniskirt and how short that skirt became before it started to go back down. And then we had the midi and the maxi come along. So they push the limits. And in this case, the Poulain shoe, or Krakow was called because it was from Krakow, Poland. And people who were wealthy, so nobility and the people in the courts, kings and queens, would wear the extreme styles because it showed status and wealth. Think about if you're doing any kind of physical labor or something that you need to do, that you have to walk fast or you have to move around quite a bit. These shoes aren't going to cut it because you're going to be tripping on those long toes and everything. So eventually people would have to actually put something, a wrap around the toe and actually hold onto like strings or little pieces of rope so that they could walk without those things flopping around all the time. So it was for people who didn't have to do physical work. So again, a way to show I don't have to work. I have money, I'm noble, and I can get away with wearing these shoes. To protect those shoes, because the streets weren't the way they are now, paved, they were dirt, lots of horse manure, and who knows what else, people throwing stuff out the window. So those delicate shoes you just saw needed something to sit on to protect them from those elements on the road. So patins, as you can see here, were ways to do that. And especially on the left, if you look at those, look how long the toe is. So it would actually fit that exact pointed toe of the shoe right in there and protect it from the mud, etc. The ones on the right have these rings. And again, almost like it makes me think of a snowshoe, how it gives you a little bit of surface area, but it's up so that they could walk and not sink into the mud. When the Renaissance came along, of course, there's our King Henry VIII. And if you look at his portrait, he's wearing duckbill shoes, which were called that because they look like a duck's bill. They're so wide. So we went from that really pointy shoe toe to this really square toe. So complete extreme in the opposite direction. And it was the same with other things during the period. So in the medieval period, when you had those pointy shoes, there were also things like very pointy spires and buildings, and even furniture had those same kinds of points. But in the Renaissance, everything was wide. Buildings became wide, the shoes, hats, instead of being tall and skinny like the Middle Ages, they tended to be wider and flatter. So everything sort of, it's the zeitgeist of whatever's going on in that period. You can see the slits in the shoes, and Henry has them on his feet as well. And what I had read about Henry was that his feet were so wide that actually they had to put slits in so he wouldn't split the leather. But also it was a way to show off nice fabrics that were either lining the shoes or the hose that was underneath it. So they would do the same with the clothing. If you look at Henry's, his jacket and his sleeve, he's got this beautiful, probably silk satin lining that's being puffed out. And you can see showing off that fabric as well. So the slashing in the shoes could have had the same reason as the rest of his dress. And then look what happened. Talk about extremes. When we got into the 16th century, we're also there with Henry VIII. He was earlier in the century. Then a little later, especially the ladies in Venice would wear these high platform type shoes called chopine. And it was another way to show status because these ladies had to be helped around to walk. They couldn't walk on these things themselves. They'd be tripping over their gowns, and the shoes were so high, it was just too difficult. So it was another way to say, look, I don't work. I even need help to wear the latest fashions. So beautiful leather, sometimes leather, but a lot of times velvets, as you can see here, lace, a lot of embellishment. On the right, they could be up to 20 inches tall, which you see here. Big old wooden platform, and that is also a chopine. Go figure. I can't even imagine walking around in those styles. Of course, platforms came back again in the 40s and again in the 70s. And, you know, so they do come and go, but not to that extent, we hope. Here's another beautiful pair of velvet and lace and beads and tassels on those chopine, but still very high. By the 17th century, you're looking at very interesting type shoes and heels, not just for women, but for men too. If you think about, I always think of, you know, Charles II in England, and how even before that, Charles I and all that, they dressed up. The men looked feminine. They didn't think of themselves that way, but they were very into fashion. They were very into sumptuous fabrics like lace and velvets, just like the ladies were. They wore wigs that were very, very long, and they wore heels. And if you look at the one in the center and the one on the right, those are called slap soles. And that is, it says what it does. So a gentleman would walk and just the front of the shoe was attached to that, so, that platform on the bottom. And every time he walked, the heel would click against the heel of that platform and make a noise announcing his coming. And it just was a way to say, hey, look at me, I can wear these crazy looking shoes and slap around, and because I'm at the court, I don't have to do any physical labor. So same thing. Slap soles were also worn by women. There's, I think, no, I think these are all men's, but I have seen women's slap sole shoes as well. But it was the men who really outdid the women in terms of lavish style. By the 18th century, this is, I just think that the shoes are beautiful. And the men are still wearing very dressy shoes, and they're still wearing silks and satins as well. These are women's shoes in this case. What you're seeing is two pieces of fabric that cross over the instep on the top of the shoe, and that holds it to the foot. And they would either put a buckle or some kind of a pin to hold those together. So there were no laces or anything like that. You'd have a buckle or a pin. In grad school, we had to go into the collection. They had this vast, beautiful antique clothing and accessories collection at the school. And we would pick out, some piece from the collection and have to really analyze it and figure out exact details about when it was from. So I picked a pair of shoes, and I remember they were a really light green. They had been a wedding shoe of a woman from Massachusetts, I believe. And they had those latchets, just like it's showing you there. And there was no buckle or pin left, but you could see the holes where they had been. So I thought that was really cool. So that's a typical 18th century shoe. You can see the heel is more of a Louis heel, which, by the way, is very comfortable if you've ever worn that style. Here's another shoe from the period. And the buckles could be very ornamental as well. And just like the patterns with the poulain shoes in the Middle Ages, you see clogs, which also protected the shoes from the streets and whatever was on the streets. So you can see on the left, you see the shoe separate from the clog. And on the right, that's what they look like together. I just think that's so cool. But I mean, they're nice clogs. They're velvet. So I can't imagine they'd want to get those muddy, but apparently that's what they did, because they didn't want to have anything too plain either way, but they're protecting the shoe inside. Now we're finally to the 19th century. And the main thing about this period is we are going from, think about the French Revolution, where the monarchy was abolished. And now people don't dress the way they did during that century and the centuries before that. They're in a much plainer style. The women go into muslin dresses with an empire waist in the early part of the century. And the men are, instead of being in knee breeches and fancy fabrics and lace and all of that they had been doing, they have graduated to a suit that's much more similar to how we think of suits today. Nothing fancy, just more of, instead of breeches, they would wear plain cloth trousers, or which they call pantaloons, and they'd wear shirt, waistcoat, and a jacket over that, coat over that. Nothing fancy as it had been. Doesn't mean that the fabrics weren't beautiful, but it was more looking at the working man and what the working man wore, trying to support that whole effort to even out society. The women, again, wore these muslin dresses, and with them, they would wear very flat shoes, as you can see here. And they were called straights, which means there was no right and left. Your foot would sort of, the shoe would mold to the foot. You didn't have a left and a right. I danced ballet for a long time when I was younger, and the toe shoes or point shoes are still made that way. They're still straights. They still don't have a right and a left. So looking at those shoes, especially on the right, you see there's just really no heel. And that will continue on for a little while, for 1 or 2 decades of the century. Even in the 1830s and 40s, you still have quite a flat heel, but it's the shoes starting to change shape a little bit. Here you see satin shoes, and then up on the right, you see more of a designed or embroidered shoe. So they could be day wear, some of them are evening wear. And of course, they had walking shoes as well for this time period. But these were called slippers because they were very lightweight and they were often worn for dancing or for more formal occasions. Baby shoes, of course, they tended to look like this for quite a while. Little boys and little girls who were toddlers and younger would tend to wear dresses, whether they were boys or girls. And they would also have these little boots to go along with it. And that's the buttons, just like their moms would have shoes with buttons. The children, the young children had those as well. And these are obviously in pretty good shape considering their age. So it's always fun to look at. But from 1840s to around 1900, these shoes were popular with little kids, both girls and boys. So sometimes it was hard to distinguish the boy from the girl because, of course, the boys were in dresses and their hair wasn't always short. So I'm sure there were a lot of little boys that were thought to be girls at the time. As we move forward and get away from just the flat heel for ladies, we're looking at walking shoes called Congress boots. These became popular in the 1860s. And if you look at, consider Victorian period, which is 1837 to 1901. So the span of Victoria's reign until her death. And plaids, she made very popular, partly because of her castle at Balmoral in Scotland. And she dressed her kids in plaid, and that was just popular with the masses as well. So that Congress boot in the middle is a perfect example. And dresses, also lots of plaid in dresses, and even for children, that was because she dressed her own children in those. So you see different versions. Sometimes you see the lacing on the side, like the middle and the right one on the right. And sometimes you see just a piece of material that sort of is inserted into the boot itself. Heels could be flat, or they could have a little bit of a rise like you see in those other two examples. So those are Congress boots, walking shoes. Boudoir shoes are very fancy, and they would be like the slippers we wear today. We don't wear things like this necessarily, but we do wear usually different footwear in the evening. And I know I have slippers that I wear with socks. I mean, it's nothing fancy. We're in Vermont, so all winter I wore these fleece-lined kind of high socks that are popular up here. And but back then, it mattered what you wore, even in your own bedroom, even if no one really saw you. It was expected, especially the wealthy. There was a certain standard. And look at these. I mean, they have a heel. They're embroidered. I think they're velvet, but they could be just a silk satin, and they have all of that beautiful floral addition right at the vant there. Just gorgeous. And so these would be just for the bedroom only. By the 1880s, you start to see some interesting changes. And here's your Louis heel, which is going to remain popular for a while. And we saw that earlier in the 1700s. We're seeing that again. And very comfortable. It's sort of like it distributes your weight more evenly. I have shoes that are modern that are made to look vintage. They're, like repro. And they have that Louis heel. And I gotta tell you, there's nothing more comfortable. They're great. So they must have had that idea back then and said, let's go back to these because these were much more comfortable. Here's your button shoes. But by then you've got laces as well. You could lace up your shoes, your boots, or you could still have these number of buttons. And I just love those on the right, the red velvet with the gold, beautiful embroidery. This is a little video on how to use a button hook. It's not as easy as it looks. So here we go.
Hi, I'm Lauren from American Duchess, and today I'm going to show you how to use a Victorian button hook. In In the 19th and 20th centuries, shoes and boots often buttoned closed. Shoes usually had 1 to 4 buttons each, but button boots, popular from the 1850s onward, could have anywhere from 5 to 10 to 15 buttons each. That's 10 buttons, 20 buttons, 30 buttons. But a staple of every Victorian lady's wardrobe was the button hook. This tool made it quick and easy to do up all those boot buttons as well as tight bodice buttons. I'm going to demonstrate on a pair of American Duchess Tavistock Victorian button boots. These are real button boots. There's no Velcro, there's no zippers, they're totally functional. And when you purchase a pair of these from AmericanDuchess.com, so how does it work? Simply pass the hook through the buttonhole, hook the steel shank of the button, and pull it through with a twisting motion. See, the first time you do it, it'll feel clumsy, but you'll get the hang of it, and before you know it, you'll be doing up your buttons in a flash. Usually you're better with one hand than the other. You can find original button hooks in antique stores, the flea markets, and sometimes in your grandma's kitchen drawer. Or you can get a pretty reproduction button hook with a pair of Victorian button boots or individually in the accessories section at AmericanDuchess.com. Hope this was helpful. Go forth and button line boots. Have fun, and thank you for watching.
So you could see
My
she
button hook sticking out.
makes it look easy.
Let's just set that down. Just set it down.
So American Duchess is obviously, it's a company that makes reproduction shoes. And I guess she was saying if you order a pair of shoes, a button boots, you get the button hook with it. I have a couple of antique button hooks. I have a really small one that I think was also used for buttoning blouses in some cases. And then I have a longer one. So I'll show you those at the end. So that's a button hook. Sure, it takes a lot of practice. 1890s, we're looking at slingback slippers. So this is still, I think this could be an evening shoe. I don't think this was necessarily a boudoir shoe. And you can see the beautiful Louis heel again, still being worn in the 1890s. But look at that embroidery on the toe. I just think it's amazing that this style of the full toe having embroidery lasted for quite a while. I have a pair of shoes I'll show you from probably the teens to the 20s. I'm not even sure which date it is. I'm likely to put it in more the teens, the 19 teens, and it has that beautiful embroidery as well. So I'll show you that in a minute. Another interesting style in the 1890s was the barrette boot. And you can see why they call it that, because it has all of these amazing straps across not only the foot, but also going up the ankle. I've seen reproductions of these before too. They're very, very cool. It makes me think of the not go-go dancers, can-can dancers in the 1890s. And that's all I could think of with these boots, because I think that's something they would have worn in those venues. Beautiful shoes. By 20th century, in the Edwardian period, you're starting to see more variety for both men and women. You're still seeing button shoes, these boots, walking shoes on the left. I have a pair of those, very similar to these. And so right around the turn of the century, you'd see more of these coming in, like that spectator style. They look like they have spats over them. Spats are spatter dashers, which was just a kind of like a cuff that would go over the shoe and protect it from, the elements to some extent. So you'll see that an example of that in a minute. And then you've got a walking boot up on the right, and then a little bit different type of evening shoe. Look at the size of that heel by the 20th century, and you're seeing more of a pointed toe coming along as well. So you'll see an example of one like that, but a little earlier than this that I have in my collection. Here are your spats. I actually have a pair just like those on the right, but in gray, and they're for ladies. I couldn't find them for you. I apologize. I couldn't find them tonight, but they are, it says R.H. Macy's on the inside, and they're from 1913. So this just really wonderful. The spats on the left, as you can see, will cover more. So maybe if it's a boot or if it's just you have leg wear on that you want to protect a little bit more, they would do the job for that. And then the strap goes right underneath the shoe, so it would hold it in place for you. So those are spats, and men and women wore those, and children too. By the time we get to the war years, World War I, 1914 to 18, we're seeing more of a variety of heights, especially in boots. And that's because in the war years, the skirts rose. Because remember, before this, we had long skirts to the floor, pretty much. And by the war years, when women were doing more of men's work, in many cases, there were so many men fighting, that the skirts got a little bit higher for convenience, for comfort. And so you couldn't have a boot that was too short because you weren't supposed to show. There shouldn't have been a gap between the hem of your skirt and the top of your boot. So boots got higher in that period. And that's a great example on the right. That tie-up boot would have been worn with these little bit. They weren't short, but they were definitely not at ankle length. They were a little above that. And then beautiful shoes on the left that were a little bit dressier. So that would have been more of a working or walking shoe on the right, or boot, and then a dressier shoe for evening on the left during those years. More embroidery. As I said, the shoes I have remind me of this when they have this beautiful beaded embroidery all the way through, and a few buttons still there. And look at the Louis heel there. It's a little bit higher. Still the same shape, so I'm sure they were quite comfortable. Oh, the 20s. Well, what can I say? The 20s, everything changed. Talk about your hemline shifting. After World War I, hemlines did go back down for a little while, but then they started to creep up again. And of course, women finally earned the right to vote in 1920. And so they were getting a little crazy, you know, let's have fun, you know, times are good, we can vote. Many women, of course, cut their hair into a bob style. Not all women, but many women did, especially younger women. And they would go out dancing. And it was the jazz age. So you not only had prohibition, and you had to go out, either have cocktails at home with that dreadful bathtub gin in some cases, or go to a speakeasy and be able to get alcohol that way. And of course, they'd have bands and music. So there was a lot of dancing. There was the Charleston. There was a lot of other dances, even the tango a little earlier, that continued to be popular in the 20s. So the shoes not only had to have a comfortable heel for dancing for the ladies. If you can see the heel, that looks like it's sort of a modified Louis heel, but still fairly substantial. The shoes also needed to have a way to stay on the foot. Because if you've seen some of those 20s dances, like the Charleston and others, that they're flinging their feet and legs around, those shoes are just going to go flying off. So they always had either, you know, some kind of a strap or a set of straps like T-straps with a button, or another way to fasten the shoe to the foot so they wouldn't fly off and hit somebody in the head. So beautiful gold leather shoes on the left, and then more of it looks like a fabric and leather combination on the right, both with straps to keep it securely attached to the foot. This is my favorite. I show this shoe when I do the Roaring 20s presentation too. I don't know why they don't still do this. These are actual shoes from the 20s. And those little vials in the back on the heel going up high, those are lipstick cases. So picture it. You're going out, let's say you have a date, you're going out as a young woman in the 1920s, going out dancing. You have a date, so hopefully, you know, it's not like today where everybody pays their own. Man's going to pay for you, so you don't need any money, right? You might smoke, but hopefully you can bum some cigarettes from him or from somebody else. All you need is a little lipstick to refresh. So you don't even have to take a bag with you. You just go into that shoe, pull it out, and there you go. So I like to say to think too, maybe the other one isn't lipstick, but maybe it's a little bit of booze in there, just if they need a little bit of a sip. So who knows? But I just think this is fabulous. I just love, now we carry around these big satchels and cell phones, and our whole lives are in our bags, it seems. So this was just a nice lighter way to travel. So lucky them. By the 30s, after Prohibition ended, but you still, I think it went on till 1933. But of course, you had the crash of the stock market in 29. And so hemlines went down again. So the 30s look is calf length again. It's not as high as it was in the 20s. It definitely is closer to the calf, and then even longer if it was evening wear. So you're starting to see the heel sometimes get a little higher, as you see here. So those are dancing shoes on the left. There's sort of like a ballroom shoe. And then the shoes, the middle and the right, are more day wear walking shoes. I have a pair I'm going to show you from this period that look very similar to the ones in the middle, even with the cutout that you see, very similar. So you'll get to see those at the end too. If you look at this shoe quickly, you might think, 1970s, right? Because that platform came back. But no, this was right before World War II broke out. And in 38, he developed these, and I think they were brought to market in 1939. And this gentleman was Salvador Ferragamo. So you know that it's leather goods and accessories. And this was the famous 39 Ferragamo platform shoe. During wartime, they had to get very creative because there were shortages. So, there were certain materials, especially leather, had to go to the war front, had to go, towards the war effort. So they had to use other materials. And a lot of times they use cork for these wedges or for these platforms. And even things like rope, think about espadrilles. So they had to get creative. And so this was an extreme example of an artist's, designer's creativity during this period of time. So those are very famous shoe. I'm sure you've seen them before. In the 40s, again, you see the peep toe become a very popular thing. And the shoes in the middle, I have a very, very similar, almost exactly the same style from the period, but they're blue, two different shades of blue, and they're not in as good shape. They're not terrible, but they're not in as good a shape as the ones in the middle there. So you can see the peep toe becoming popular, and the slingback, like you see on the right. So the shoes are looking a lot sturdier in the 40s because, again, you needed the practicality of that. You're not going to walk around in dainty little slippers and little heels when, there's a war going on and women had work to do, but they still wanted to look good. And they still wanted to keep morale up for the soldiers because it was said, a woman still needs to look good, wear that red lipstick, increase the morale of everybody. And, that's putting your patriotic duty into effect. So they still wanted to look like women. And one more thing about the 40s, because nylon had just come out in 39, women were loving their nylon stockings with the seams down the back. However, no more nylon during World War II. It's a very light, very strong fiber, went towards things like parachutes and other things for the war. So no more nylon. So women would actually put leg makeup on and then have the line drawn up the back of their legs to look like the seam. So it still gave them that look of their beloved stockings without actually trying to find them. So sometimes soldiers would bring stockings home to their girlfriends when they were on leave. Very important to those ladies. This is all about 40s shoes. This is a website called Glamour Days, and they do these wonderful videos with these old film clips. So if you subscribe to their YouTube channel, you will get these on your email. So just to let you know, wonderful. Here it comes. So again, you can go to their website, and I think they have their YouTube. If you subscribe, you get those videos automatically. Lots of fun. Late 40s, a whole change came in the fashion of the day, and the new look was born. During the war, of course, women's look was boxy, kind of the wide padded shoulders, limited fabric used, so you couldn't have wide skirts. They were very narrow, and they were only right below the knee, not very long. That was all, again, because of necessity. By 47, Christian Dior, Parisian designer, came out with this new look that was the opposite of the war look. Shoulders softened, the waist became cinched in again, and the skirt became below the knee, back to calf length, either very wide or eventually very narrow, which they now call wiggle skirts or wiggle dresses because they're so tight. A woman is forced to wiggle when she walks. Think about like Marilyn Monroe in the 50s, especially when that look was very big. So shoes started to change as well. So late 40s, you're seeing very similar designs to these. You still have some peep toes, but you're seeing more leather come back in and less of the kind of funky combinations of shoe materials that we saw during the war. I have a pair of shoes that look very similar to those ones right in the middle. So you'll see those too. As the new look progressed, it still stuck around, but you started to have more possibilities and styles for ladies. But shoes, these were just a specific kind of shoe called baby toes or baby dolls. And they were around for just about a year. I think it was a real fad. And just some ladies would wear them. And the heel was kind of high in some cases, but look how rounded the toes were. So it was just completely different than what we had seen earlier. But just a very short-lived trend. And then, of course, along came the stilettos. So by the late 50s, we're seeing these really narrow steel-based heels and, pointy toes. And so very glamorous, make the legs look terrific. But boy, they hurt and they're tough to walk in. I don't have the real thing, but I have a pair of, and I'll show you at the end, a pair of red, shiny like these shoes. They are Stuart Weitzman, and they're gorgeous. I've tried to wear them a few times just for special events. They look great, but ow, after a while, they've got to come off. I'm just not used to that anymore. But I got them for $15 at a flea market. They'd never been worn. Who knew? I mean, they were my size, grabbed them. So they're perfect now to be able to show you a very similar style to that, even though it's not 50s. Marilyn Monroe, I was talking about her, how famous she was in the 50s. Ferragamo, remember his 1939 platform. Here are crystal shoes that she wore in Some Like It Hot. Look at those shoes. How beautiful those are, and expensive, I'm sure. And then in 57, these are shoes that she wore in Montreal. So very, very 50s style. I have a pair I will show you. These are called the Springulator. And the genius of these shoes is that, sometimes if you have a heel, like a sandal with a heel, your foot goes so far forward, sometimes your toes start to kind of almost go over the front of the shoe. Well, this prevented that. If you look, you can see it in both shoes actually, but you can see that space between the inside of the shoe and the lining. You see there's that little space. What that does is when a lady puts her foot in there, it pushes that down, but it springs back up again, keeping her foot in place. So I have a shoe I will show you that is similar to that. And it's actually this shoe right here. I have this exact shoe that I'm going to show you. And oftentimes they would send you heel replacements too, so that you could have, an etched heel like you see here, but you could also have a plainer. Celluloid was a very big plastic at the time, and that's what these heels were made out of. And if you broke a heel or you lost a heel, you could have a cobbler put the replacement on for you. So these were very popular in the 50s too. My favorite thing about the 50s and even parts of the early 60s, early to mid, is the matchy way the shoes and bags would be. Sometimes it was just color. Sometimes, you'd have red shoes, red bag, maybe a red hat and red gloves. But in this case, it was actually the same fabric and same material. And I just think that is so glamorous. They did that with jewelry too. They did matching sets. So it would be sometimes a necklace and earrings and a bracelet, all of the same material that they'd wear all at once. So very matchy in those days. And I just love that. But you can see the pointy toe and the thin heel as well. And then the London look hit. And now we're looking at the mods coming out of London. They started much earlier. We didn't have this hit until maybe, early to mid 60s. And that's where we started to see a much more loosening up of fashion, especially for young people. And the music scene changed. Think about the Beatles, think about the British invasion of all of those groups. And you're seeing a much more comfortable looking shoe by this period. And here you see the buckles. You're going to see another example. It's similar to that, but a much squarer heel, much sturdier than what we'd been seeing, especially in the late 50s. So we've got those kinds of styles. Sometimes shoes were painted, but they were practical. On the left, you can see different styles and shapes and sandals, but they have a flatter heel. And not only is it flatter, it's wider. So in that case, you start to see a lot of bright colors during this period as well. So this says Campus Queens, and for $2.99, you could get one of those styles. So this was more for, think college age young women. Still in the 1960s, I remember my sisters are 7 and 8 years older than me. And one of my sisters, I remember her wearing shoes very similar to the one on the left. The slingbacks were very popular with that little kitten heel. So that became popular during that time as well. And then that's just a little bit different version on the right, a little sturdier looking heel on that version. This is the one I wanted to show you. I remember when this came out, I think it was 66 or 67, I believe, Roger Vivier Pilgrim Pump. And everybody wanted them, and everybody, there were reproductions, or copies from other shoe designers, but this was the original 60s version. Vivier they still make this kind of shoe now, bringing that same style back again. But I remember my sister had a pair, the same sister who wore the slingbacks. She had a pair, but she was a size smaller than me. She was 6.5. I was 7.5. I wanted to wear them so badly. I wanted to wear them to school. So I crammed my foot into them and I suffered the whole day, but it was worth it. So that was just a very popular thing for, again, kind of a short time. Go-go boots, all the rage in the 60s. And designers such as Andre Courrèges would use these kinds of boots as a very kind of a hip thing for young people. Sometimes the boots were tall, but many times they were short, more just below the calf. I had a pair, not Courrèges for sure, but just, a copy of that. And I think I was in 5th grade, so it was probably 1967 maybe. And I remember these boots being everywhere. And the tall boots, right, up to the knee as well. And you can see the ads on the right have the higher length boot too. 65 here. 67, I think, is when I had them. I think they came out earlier, at least Courrèges' version. Who doesn't remember these? Dr. Scholl's in 1969. Think about Earth Day in 1970. People were becoming more conscious of the environment, even back then. And in 70, you'll see the Earth shoe in a minute. But these were also considered along the same lines. That it was very uncomfortable at first, but it was lumpy right under the toes, but it was supposed to help strengthen your legs as you walked. And eventually you'd kind of get used to them, and they weren't any big deal, but they were just that wooden platform, no support, but just the thing to wear in the summer. That was just what people wore in 69. And then in 1970, there was the Earth shoe. And this crazy shoe, I remember my boyfriend in high school had a pair just like these, but a little darker color. And they the heel or the sole was higher in the front than in the back. So that was supposed to be a better way, a healthier way of walking. So we'll talk about this too in a few minutes when I end the show. But I wonder if I saw a pair in the antique store right down the street a few months ago. And I wish I bought them, because when I finally said to myself, I've got to pick up those because I need to be able to show people, they were still in the box and I didn't buy them. And I'm so mad they're gone, but I'll find another pair, I'm sure. That, again, 1970s, early 70s. And then came the platforms, and boys and girls, guys and girls wore these. So if you ever saw the movie Saturday Night Fever, the guys, especially one guy, the friend who ended up dying in the movie, he had these really, really high-heeled platform shoes on, and these crazy colors for both guys and girls. So this was a very popular style for a good part of the 70s. And if you look at the one on the left, it sort of resembles, at least the platform part resembles Ferragamo shoes from 1939. So everything comes back in some form. Disco City, remember 77, 76, these big heels, and these are men's. And then those are ladies' shoes on the right. But so both guys and girls, you know, going to the disco, whatever, would wear these very high platform heels. And then eventually they started to thin out again and become more like a stiletto or a little bit wider version of that. And but that came along a little later. In the early 70s, the high boots became popular again because they were worn not only with short skirts that were still around, but with hot pants. And I always tell, whenever I do the 60s, and I tell my audience, it's like the skirt got so short, the only thing left to do was to put a crotch in it and call it hot pants. And that's what it seemed like they did. So, you know, yeah, otherwise everything showed. You had to do something. So a lot of times the hot pants were worn with these high boots and stockings, either fishnets or kind of colorful stockings or tights. And you can see sometimes too on the left, these skirts would be worn over them, a longer skirt over the hot pants, so that but it would be open in the front so you could see the shorts underneath. Wild time, short-lived, fortunately. 70, 71, 72 maybe, that was it. And then, as I mentioned, the disco era, so we're talking, you know, later 70s here, but you're looking, there's John Travolta on the left, but you're looking at this much more of a strappy look sandal for dancing at that point. So the platforms started to go away, especially for ladies, and some men still wore them. But this thinner heel came about, and then, but on the right, you can see it's a little sturdier, but it's still a high heel, very popular for disco dancing. And this is terrific. This is, now we're into the 90s. This is Naomi Campbell falling on the runway. And if you look at Vivienne Westwood's shoe on the left, you can see why. You're going to see a tape of this in a minute, a video of her. But I saw these. I went to London once in 2004 with a school group, my first teaching job. And it was heaven on earth to me. We were only there for a week, but we went to the V&A, and I spent the entire, we only had 2 hours in there. I never even saw the rest of the museum. I spent the entire time in Vivienne Westwood's exhibit. She had her clothing, her accessories, and these shoes were there. So I never forgot that. So these were made in 1993. And how anyone can walk in those and not kill themselves is anybody's guess. So here she's talking to David Letterman, and you're going to see this happen.
We have some videotape of you doing some runway.
Me doing my work at my best.
Okay. Do you know where this was? This was in Europe
Absolutely,
somewhere?
it's in Paris. And I work really hard, and just anything can happen to you.
Here now is Naomi Campbell at her best, being a supermodel. Watch closely. Now, you know what's frightening about that? It looks like you could have broken both of your ankles.
I could have broken both of my ankles.
That was a nasty, nasty fall.
Terrible fall.
But the other thing, nobody move to help you?
No one moved. No one moved a muscle in their faces. They were just nervous until I started laughing. Then they started laughing too.
Yes, and then you continued on. You carried on.
I got up and I continued, but it hasn't done so badly. I mean, I made a commercial out of that, an insurance commercial and a chocolate commercial.
I know. We'll get to that in a second. But sociologically speaking, it's a little frightening.
It is, and it's
That a
not
lovely
practical.
woman, obviously in duress, hits the deck, kaboom,
Kaboom.
and these idiots, these Euro
trash.
yeah, are just. Well, look at this. Look at this. Oh, yeah. Oh no, she almost hit me with her thing. Look at that. They're just looking. Oh, get a photo. Let's get a photo. Idiots. What is wrong with people? And then nobody helps you to your feet.
No one helps you to your feet. That's
Yeah.
his business.
Yeah. But you were uninjured and you continued on.
Uninjured.
Yeah.
Continued.
So that's the story with her. And it's just, I can't believe she didn't break something on the way down there. It's just amazing. She handled it very well, I must say. So that's the end. I stopped in the 90s because, by 2000, there's not much interesting stuff going on now. There really isn't in my book. They're looking back, if anything, and bringing some of those styles back again. So I thank you for sitting through this slideshow and video clips, and I'm going to stop the share, and you're going to see some cool stuff in a minute. Okay, let me get out of here. And let's see. Okay. All right, I'm going to make this bigger. There we go. Okay. And all right, I'm going to start with the oldest pair of shoes that I have from about the 1830s. And I found these in an antique store, and they're silk satin, off-white, and they still have the little tiny ribbons on them to tie around the ankle, just like that's what they did back then, to hold the slipper on their foot for dancing. It's a straight, it's not a right or a left, and it's flat. Has been worn because you can see it in the sole, which I think is even cooler. But what great condition, considering that they are from the 1830s. The oldest one I have. The next one is probably a little bit later than that, maybe 1840s. This is also the heel's a little bit different, and it has a little shoe clip on it. So this was definitely an evening shoe, very, very nice kid leather, just marked up. So it's definitely been worn and loved. But this is another old shoe that I have. And just the fact that it's still around just is amazing. And this next shoe has that Louis heel. I'd say this is maybe somewhere between the 1860s and the turn of the century. It's hard to say exactly, but this would have been a much bigger flower or, rosette design on there. It's just that it's so old, it started to kind of fall apart a little bit. But that's a pretty good Louis heel that you see right there. And it's definitely silk satin. And silk shatters. I don't know how much you know about silk, but silk, after it's certain amount of years old, it starts to break apart. And silk was sometimes weighted too with metallic salts, and that caused more shattering of the silk. And they eventually stopped doing that. But so this has some shattering as well. But again, for an old shoe or slipper, and this is definitely this is the right foot, so it's not a straight anymore. That's why I know it's later in the century. And but a lovely evening shoe, maybe a wedding shoe. Okay, remember the lady with the button hook? Well, here are some day shoes, definitely leather and a sort of felt material. And it has the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 buttons. Still all there. And the button hook that would be used would look like this. I'm not going to even attempt to try to do those buttons up because I tell you, I'm not practiced enough yet. But this is a definite button hook from this period. And just these, look how comfortable they look. Flat heel. These definitely would have been walking shoes when the skirts were long, because this is not very high. So this would have been before World War I for sure. So it could have been the end of the 19th century or very early 20th. I have another button hook. Where did it go? Here it is. This is another one, but it's so short. I think I had read that some blouses, needed, there were so many buttons that they needed to use a hook to do them all. So I don't think this is so much for shoes. It could have been, but I think this is probably more for a bodice or, a blouse situation. Two more walking boots, one laced with leather and fabric. And this is a little higher. And so I'm thinking this would have been right during World War I, 14 to 18. And it's got a very sturdy heel, but it's definitely high enough to be able to, if the skirts came just a little below that, the woman would have been all set. And this one has a flat heel and it's all leather, ties as well. Says something on the bottom. There's something shoes with leather heels. It doesn't, I can't see the whole thing, but very narrow foot too, how narrow that is. But this would have been a walking shoe, probably same thing, right around the same time, maybe a little before the war or right during that period because it's still high. This is the next oldest. Remember I told you about that embroidery with, I hope you can see this okay, with beads. That's what you see here. I bought these at an antique show that's in Sturbridge, Mass. The day before Brimfield, before COVID hit anyway. They have a vintage clothing show in the hotel in Sturbridge. And that's where I bought these years ago. And they've been loved and worn because the bottom will show you that. But they're in great condition. Satin, black satin with this gold or bronze beading detail. And then two little buttons that would hold it on the foot. So these could have been 20s, but I think they were a little bit earlier than that, just because I've seen a lot of styles, maybe the late teens, which I would think. Okay. 30s. Remember the shoes I showed you? I said there's the shoe very similar. Can you see all the cutouts in the front? I don't know if the lighting is that good. These have ties, just like that shoe did on the slide I showed you. And it says John Wanamaker. John Wanamaker, never worn. There's not one little mark on that sole. I love these shoes. So typical 30s style, sturdy heel, incredible condition for its age. Another look-alike 40 shoe that I told you, there was a shoe that I said, boy, that I have a shoe that's similar, except it's two different colors. And that's this suede shoe, but look at the style with the little peep toe. So that was definitely a 40s shoe and well loved and worn. It's starting to, it lost its lining on the inside, but the heel is still intact. And it still has all its straps and they're not broken yet. Tiny, tiny. I can't fit my foot in that thing, but it's beautiful. Perfect example of a 40s day shoe. Later 40s, remember I talked about the new look? That's when this shoe became popular. And I told you we saw one that was a different material. This is like a crocodile, but it's the same style with that very high vamp, very high cut vamp, and quite a sturdy heel, even though it's high. So this says Vanity Footwear, made in USA, Myra hand lasted, and it's alligator. Yep, genuine alligator. I would never buy new alligator shoes, but these are vintage. They were before I was born when they were made. So I'm like, it's recycling. But they're gorgeous. I've worn these actually for special events. They're my size, fortunately. And then let's get into the 50s. Was popular in the 50s, and especially with these little cutouts that you can see here, and kind of glamorous looking with the sling back and peep toe, and then this kind of sturdy heel. So this would have been earlier 50s. Late 40s to early 50s, most likely, because remember the stiletto is going to come about in the later 50s. This one I think is, this is a tough one. I looked this up. It says House of Pierre, handcrafted, and it's all fabric. It's gorgeous. I hope you can see that. I feel like it's tough to see in this light. Oh, there we go. But that same kind of high cut, but this Diorce look right here. So it kind of comes down. So this could be 50s, it could be 40s, but it's definitely an older shoe. It might even be early 60s, but just a gorgeous, I've never seen anything like that before. Here's the Spring-A-Later. You ready for the Spring-A-Later? This exact shoe that you saw on the slide. Now the plastic is rigid now. It wouldn't have been this, I can't even imagine if it was this tough, nobody could wear it because it would have cut your foot to shreds. So I'm sure it was softer, but over the years it became brittle. But here's the Spring-A-Later. And again, the foot goes in, this goes down, and then it springs right back up again, and the foot will stay in place instead of coming over the end of the shoe. Look at that heel, all etched. Why can't we get these anymore? Why? Gorgeous. Oh, I have shoe envy. I really do. Okay, here's the Stuart Weitzman I told you about that I got at the flea market, but they are so much like a 50s stiletto. And they're the shiny red, and they are a big heel, but they are beautiful, and they could be worn with any, if you were trying to do a 50s reproduction kind of thing, these would be the perfect shoes to wear. Okay, now we talk mod period. I only have one pair of shoes from that period, and I found them recently, if you can believe it or not, at a Salvation Army here in Vermont. They are 60s mod, and you can see right here with the buckles, flat, wide heel, rounded to square toe, and inside it says Joseph's Teen Shoes. How cool is that? And those are my size too. I got them really inexpensively. Sometimes, you know, you just get lucky. You can go to a vintage show and you're going to pay a lot more for any vintage shoe. But if you go to a place like a thrift store and you're willing to look, you can get lucky. So I grabbed these babies as soon as I saw them. Two more to show you. These are probably late 60s, but look at these shoes. Think about, remember the 60s had, you saw this orange and kind of mustard, and think about appliances, avocado green, harvest gold, and burnt orange. These are the colors. And it's more of a rounded toe, a nice little heel, and look at the decals on the back. Matches the stripes on the front. Says Thomas Court Limited, Core Fam, DuPont, believe it or not. Who knew? So those are probably late 60s. And the last one is from the 80s. Look at this shoe. This says Martinique, made in Spain, Stuart Weitzman. And that heel is so typical 80s, that kind of cone shape heel. And just like that has this beautiful leather applique in the front, it has it on the heel as well. So that's my collection, and I hope you enjoyed it all. I'm going to ask you to unmute and let's open it up and see if you have any questions or comments. It's a lot of stuff you saw tonight, so I want to see what you think, and if any of you have shoes like this or have in the past.
I have a question.
Yeah, hi.
And I wore go-go boots in high school.
Oh yeah. So you know what I'm
dating
talking about.
myself, but yeah,
Hey.
I had go-go boots, and then I ended up being a hippie, and all I wore was moccasins. But
Yeah, I went through that too.
yeah. A couple of questions.
Yes.
Some of this embroidery and the embellishment is really ornate.
Yeah.
So were all these shoes, even into the 20th century, were they all handmade? Or when did these ornate shoes start being mass produced?
Boy, that's a very good question. That's a very good question. I would say by the 20s for sure. because things were just moving a lot faster, and there was just more manufacturing going on, lots of ready to wear. Now that happened earlier, ready to wear. And I'm sure, but I think the mass production of shoes would have been for the less expensive shoes, just like you think of it today with mass production and fast fashion. But that really ornate shoe would most likely have been handmade.
Mm.
Yeah. So only the people with money could afford them for the most part.
I have a question.
Yeah.
When did women start designing these shoes?
When did
Most
women?
of these shoes, most of these shoes were designed by men.
Yes. Yes. I would say probably, I mean, I don't know an exact date, but I'll bet it wasn't until 50s, 60s, you know, and beyond, because who else but a man would design some of these shoes? I mean,
Right.
man, they didn't have to walk in them, right?
Right. Right.
Crazy. Anybody else have any comments? Anybody recognize any of these shoes at all? I know you said.
Yeah. Costume
Yeah.
design.
What's
I'm a costume designer, so I'm familiar with all these different periods.
Oh, good. Tell me more.
Well, I have my own business out of my house, and I do, I design a lot of things, embellishment. I have embellishment lines. I have
Oh,
fashion clothing lines, and I appreciate all this. I know the work that goes into all these
yes.
things.
That's the thing. You know how hard it is, so you can appreciate it even more. God bless you. Do you do costume design for theater?
Well, I do when there's productions, and I do movies too
Oh,
when they're going. But I'm in Connecticut, so like unfortunately, the movie business is not that great here.
right.
But
Right. Yeah. Well, I tell you, I give you credit because I can't sew a stitch. And I do mean can't sew a stitch. Grad school, I had to do just a very little bit conservation and a couple, nothing major, because I would have flunked out. I just don't, I don't have good fine motor skills. And to be a designer and to sew, and you have to, right? You have to be able to do that. I'm always dropping stuff and swearing, and no, it's just not my thing. So I give you a lot of credit. I really admire people who can design and who can sew. I'm just not one of them. I love talking about it. I just don't want to work on it. That makes sense.
this was the program. By the way, are you members of the Costume Society of America?
Yeah.
Me
Yeah.
too.
Oh, when are we going to have a symposium in person again?
I know it's going to be in Minneapolis next year, but I did sign on to this virtual symposium the end of May.
You did. I didn't. I had a conflict. I have a wedding that I need this wedding. Otherwise, I would have too. Yeah. Well, enjoy that. I can't wait till we have one in person again. I miss that.
I do too.
Oh, I really do.
I'll send you an email.
Maybe I'll see you in Minneapolis.
Yeah, never know. I look forward to it. I tell you, that's positive.
Yep. Exactly.
Hi, Karen, thank you so much for this.
You're welcome.
On shoes, I was at the Prosser Library some time ago, well, relatively recently, where they had a show on booby trapped, which was bras through the ages.
Yes.
And I suggested to them, this group that does it, why don't they do one on shoes? And the Prosser librarian remembered I said that. And so she knew about your program and told me about it. And that's when I signed up for it.
Oh, I'm so glad. I'm so glad you came. That's awesome.
Around 1965, when I was in between, just before going to college for a summer job, I was a fur model. And I had to wear these high spiked heels, black, had to wear black acetate straight skirt and just acetate black pullover blouse, nothing to detract from the furs. And but those heels were phenomenal. Oh my God.
Were they pointy too? Pointy?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Oh.
And I damaged I used to even wear them myself. And I damaged my toes. I mean, they are now pushing towards each other, and I have to put something in between. So, but at any rate, I remember wearing them.
Yeah. But I mean, they make the legs look terrific, don't they? But boy,
Yes, they
they kill
do.
you at the same time. I know. What we do for fashion, huh? Crazy. We suffer for it.
I have do you have time for another question?
Sure, sure.
The way these are all European and Western
Yes, yes,
country shoes.
yes.
So these ornate shoes and you know, the embellishment and the styles and so forth suggested wealth and
Right.
so forth. The Japanese got into foot binding.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Have you
Oh.
ever seen an
You know,
extra
with
of a
this-
foot?
Yeah, with the same goal, you know, it was the privileged class that
Yes. Yes.
had their feet bound, and why didn't they just wear fancy shoes?
I don't know.
Would
I
have
mean,
been so much better.
yeah, I
for their-
don't know. Because they the standard of beauty was the smallest foot you could
Right.
have. They
Right.
called it the lotus foot. And so in order to do that, I mean, I think they had to break the foot.
Yes, they did. They did.
And if you ever see the x-ray, it's the most hideous thing.
It
It's horrible. But then they'd wear these little fabric, embroidered shoes as well. But they had to be helped to walk. How could they possibly walk on those?
They actually crippled women, and they had to be carried everywhere.
Yeah,
So
it's awful.
were shoes not an option, or was it just the tiny feet thing?
I think
not
it was the tiny feet thing that they were admired, that a woman should have small feet, and very small. I mean, unrealistically small, as you could see. So it was a standard of beauty. It was just some of the crazy things that we see people do, like with plastic surgery and all of that. That I think is worse. I mean, that's breaking bones. That's changing the shape of the entire. I can't. But yeah, it was just what they thought the women should look like, I guess.
And when they were trying to stop that, I guess Americans, whatever,
Yeah.
whatever other countries came in and tried to help, and the women wanted to stop it, and but the women who already had their feet bound, of course, it was extremely painful to take off the bindings.
Yeah.
Very, very painful. But they chose to do it to help out the young women so they wouldn't have to get their feet bound.
Right. And thank goodness it stopped. Can you imagine if they were still doing that kind of?
Ugh,
It seems like barbaric, doesn't it?
yeah.
Imagine. And when you squeeze your feet, like you were saying, you squeeze your feet into these shoes for so many years, it can change the shape of your
Yeah.
foot.
Yeah.
But at least it didn't go to that extent, to that extreme.
No.
But boy, I'll tell you what we do for fashion, and you don't see the men doing that stuff. It's always the women, always the ladies.
Well, I have one pair of Louboutins,
Uh-huh.
and I wear them whenever I don't have to walk more than about 5 feet.
Yeah, exactly.
I can
exactly.
sit.
Yes.
But
yeah.
they're treasures. Yeah.
Oh, I did. I
Yeah.
think, they always say the really expensive shoes like that are more comfortable. Is that true? Or
No.
No.
No, because I've got a pair of, no, my daughter gave those to me as a gift because I'd always wanted a pair. And then I actually have 2 pair of Prada shoes. One is actually comfortable, one pair, they're both sandalish. They're open backs. And the other pair is just painful.
Yeah.
Just painful. You can't walk in them.
Yeah.
You
that's-
just, they just,
it's
so-
just the shape or whatever. A shape of a shoe is a shape of a shoe, no matter
Yeah.
what makes it, right?
yeah, but they're
Still
pretty.
great. They look pretty. Did you
They're
ever
really
see
pretty
the
shoes.
movie The Devil Wears Prada? Have you ever seen
Oh,
that?
yeah, yeah.
So remember when she had into the it wasn't Louboutins, it was first pair of if it wasn't later in the evening, I could tell you. Another famous shoe designer, and what was the name of it? Oh, it'll come to me in the middle of the night probably. But yes, she was, as soon as it's like she got hooked as soon as she got that expensive pair of shoes on her feet. So it can happen, people get into that high end fashion and they don't really want to go back to everyday stuff. Yeah. So, but I can't be uncomfortable like that anymore. Because to me, when your feet hurt, your whole body hurts. Do you ever
Yeah.
feel that? Oh, so
Can you imagine wearing shoes like that and also the corsets?
the corsets too. Oh yeah. I mean, think about the 50s with the stilettos. They were still wearing girdles. If not as bad.
God.
They were still
I
restricted.
remember girdles.
Oh, yeah.
I do.
Oh,
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
Oh, I
Because
remember.
we had to wear dresses to school.
Yes.
I graduated from high school in 1968. We couldn't wear pants. We had to
Right.
wear dresses.
Right.
And you either had to wear a girdle or a garter belt because you had to wear stockings
Right.
every day.
I
Hosiery.
wore a garter belt. Yeah.
Tights.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, it
I
was.
remember. Yeah, I remember.
Women
that.
are much more comfortable now.
Oh, yeah.
May I show you? May I show my embroidered shoes?
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
That's pretty.
Oh, those are gorgeous.
Wow.
Oh, where do you wear those? I hope you wear them.
A kitten heel for my daughter's wedding. I got these in San Francisco in
they're
2003.
Oh,
Yes,
they're
but
gorgeous.
they're just
Beautiful.
yeah.
They're fancy.
And I'm inspired now to wear them, not with my sweatpants, but with something. If I ever go anywhere besides Eisenhower Park or something,
You'll go back out there. You
But
will. Those
they're
shoes are
they're
lovely.
Beverly Feldman. I don't know if that's the name, but the box has the same pink inside it and everything.
Oh, it's
That's
beautiful.
just so cool.
Oh, keep those forever and make sure you get some use out of them. They're too pretty not to be shown, right?
They are so comfortable.
Oh,
Thank
good.
you for letting me butt
Thank
in.
you. Thanks for doing that. I'm thrilled. I love to see.
It's been fun. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I
have
had a good time and I hope you all did too.
Yeah.
Anybody else have any questions? I don't
I
want
don't have a question, Karen, but I am a fellow alum from URI and textile marketing.
Yeah.
So really, really enjoyed your presentation, brought me back and makes me, a little nostalgic and
yeah.
want to get back into what my passion was. So thank you for, doing this. Thank you, Nancy, for coordinating
So
this.
glad you were
Really
here. When did you
appreciate it.
graduate?
2006.
Oh, 2006. Okay. I was there. I graduated in 2002 from the master's program.
Mhm.
So I must have just missed you. Or I might
Yeah.
have met you with the grad. Yeah, because I took some
Yeah.
of the grad classes too.
Yep. And
Yeah.
that 1 week in London, Paris, and all that, I did the same program and it was life-changing for me.
Oh, it is life-changing to see that. It really is. So are you working in that now?
No. So this is why, I really appreciate this. It's bringing me back to, what I wanted to do. But I went to the business side and I ended up in finance. So very different, but
it doesn't mean you can't, go back and find your passion and find some way to make that work too, though, which I think you'll do.
Yeah, and good luck with your new business.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure
Yeah.
to have you. Thank you for telling me that. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
everybody.
signing
Thank
off.
you.
I had a
We all
great
need to go to DSW now.
Oh yeah, we all have to take a trip to do shoes.
No, Salvation Army.
Goodwill.
You never know what you're going to find. Trust me.
Oh.
It's a treasure hunt.
Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Coming and
Bye.
I'll stop by and see you in Keach in
Please do.
sometime.
Nostalgia Cafe, right on Route 4.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
All right.
Thank you, Nancy.
Wellington sometime I'll stop.
Sounds good. Everybody have a good evening and stay well and safe.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. For me.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Right.
Do I hit the leave button?
But look,
Should I hit that leave button?
sure.